blackpilling. That is the subject of today's live stream. Some of you might even ask, what the heck is a black pill? If you're not adept at understanding internet lingo, I will clarify it for you. But I think it's a proper question. And this live stream is inspired by something that was said recently by the vice president of these states united. And there'll be some commentary I'll offer about what the inherent message is that he's putting forth. But I think that there's a way to dovetail this to Christian attitudes, in particular with what is going on around them and how they should respond. This is a common question that we receive here on Irrespective, and I thought it an opportune time to bring up the subject, especially based on what the vice president recently said. Welcome each and every one of you to this new live stream of Irrespective. Welcome, welcome, welcome. For those of you that watch these pretty religiously, you would have noticed that on the last few editions, my co-host, Jesus, is not with me. Well, he'll be joining me, God willing, during the next live stream. He's just taken a bit of a break during the past few editions, much deserved, but I am at the helm solo once again on this edition, and being your captain, I will arrive you at port, at your destination, with absolute safety. Doesn't matter what the weather is dictating. Before we continue, remember to subscribe. Whether you're watching this on X, YouTube, or Rumble, remember to subscribe if you have not done so yet. To click on the notification bell if you're watching this either through YouTube or through Rumble. And to smash that like button if you're on X. The like button, which is shaped like a heart. And don't forget to share our content. It helps us immensely if you were to do that, because if there is organic interest, you know how this works. It's an algorithms game. One of the best ways to help us advance the word about Irrespective is to click on the thumbs up button and also to share our content with others. Interact with us in the chat, whether you're watching this on X, YouTube, or Rumble. Ask your question there or place your comment in the very same. Donate. It helps us to continue to publish this content for your edification. There is a QR code that is suddenly appearing on the screen. You can scan that. Conversely, you can click on the link where it says donations and patronages. In the description box, you can click or tap on that link depending on the device you're using to watch this. Last but not least, do not forget to follow us on the socials. On X, at Irrespective77, and on TikTok, at The Irrespective. Now, to the clip that I have for the audience that inspires this edition. This is what our vice president most recently said pertaining to those whom are frustrated with the administration's backpedaling on core campaign promises.
The piece of advice I'd give to you, and I give it to American students, American conservatives in particular, is resist the temptation to think that victory is immediate or that we're going to win back our civilization through instant gratification. I mean, this institution was founded in 1996. It's far more influential than it was back then, but I think a lot of people, this is particularly true in the United States of America, if they see something that the administration does they don't like, they say, oh, that's not what we voted for, we're going to check out of politics. No. That's the exact wrong response. If we do something you don't like, the response should be to get more involved, to make your voice heard, and to try to push things in the direction that you want them to be pushed. Our civilization was not built overnight. It's not going to be saved overnight. And so what I'd encourage you to do is stay involved, be patient, and don't let disappointment turn to checking out of the system entirely. There's way too much of that, I would say, in the Anglo system and the American system. There's way too much, I didn't like this thing that the vice president said, or I didn't like this thing that the president did, and I'm going to completely check out. We call that blackpilling in the United States of America, and blackpilling is how you give power to the forces that are trying to destroy what our ancestors built. We need to take power back from those people and build the kind of institutions that can actually save our societies. It will not happen overnight. It will not happen in the term of one prime minister or one president, but it will happen so long as we keep our faith in God and we work hard to achieve it. That's what we have to do.
couple of things to bring forth of all of this, and I'd like to scrub through the beginning because Vance, which by the way is not his real name, more on that shortly. Vance is a bit of an expert at answering questions in a sense that would get him a lot of likes, but also at the same time, sometimes he'll say a lot of things without saying nothing in particular. That's typical political speak. However, there are some things here that require our examination because not every politician is able to 24/7 adeptly manage questions that are necessarily difficult for them in the sense that they have to answer for something that was not expected by the electorate, or as he says, brings disappointment because it contradicts core campaign promises. And when these sorts of questions are brought forth, they try to navigate those waters in such a sense where they deflect them. But this wasn't a complete deflection by and large in this instance, but more on that shortly. First and foremost, the reason that this entire screed, or not screed, not writing, this entire small speech that he gives, this answer that he gives to a question that he receives, the reason that it inspires this is because we've received questions throughout the years with respect to some Christians as to the attitudes that they should have dependent on how they view the world or what is happening in the world. And one common response that we get from people is when they read Ecclesiastes and they approach a portion of Ecclesiastes in which Solomon states that he who grows in knowledge adds much pain. Different translations will translate that differently. But the idea is essentially as follows: the more one understands with clarity how the world works, what forces are operating in the very same, the more it brings sadness to the soul. I said in one of the most recent live streams that a lot of people just don't like truth tellers. They prefer their naivetes because they inherently understand that the world is much darker, so they prefer to adopt a posture, an attitude that intentionally blinds them to the evils that surrounds them. Look, all of us inherently know it doesn't matter how much we embrace the flawed concept that says that man is inherently good. We all understand because we ourselves know how inherently evil we are and can be. That's something that we all have to acknowledge, irrespective of whether we outwardly acknowledge it or not. That's a fact. But there are people whom are better at spinning yarn, so to speak, and those are the people that gather more adherents to them because they prefer to hear, as they were, good news. I don't like hearing bad news. The thing is that to me, whenever I hear bad news, it's just a reiteration of what the Bible, what the New Testament tells us about what abides in the world. We are humanity. Humanity is essentially fallen. We have a fallen nature that abides within us. And without the regeneration of the new birth, man is capable of anything and everything. The problem is that a lot of Christians, unfortunately, now using the term that the vice president uses here, blackpilling, which is internet slang for despondency, for being a person that has a tendency to see everything with a negative or low view. A lot of Christians think that by ultimately tapping into reality and seeing the low nature of things, that ultimately leads them to a place where they are constantly saddened. But I don't view it that way. Allow me to give you a different perspective of how this works. Number one, the more I allow reality to speak what reality is, the less deceived I am, if that makes any sense. If I allow reality to speak for itself without the flawed presentations, without the those people that are attempting to feed me a lie, without attempting to blind myself, if I just let reality speak for itself, I go back to what Jesus says. I said it recently and I'll repeat it once again. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And that includes seeing the world as it is. So I don't want to intentionally blind myself. Neither do I want to be led by people whom are going to feed me an illusion, something that isn't real. This is unfortunately a big problem within Christian circles because a lot of these merchants of false hope, they know that that's the tendency amongst many Christians, and therefore they spin the yarn. One of the experts at this is none other than Joel Osteen. And I know some of you will say, well, I've been seeing the images from Lakewood and the thing is drying up, Geo. I understand all of that. But the fact that he rose to prominence, the fact that he rose to popularity, tells me that there was a great segment of humanity that lives according to what I've just described, that particular phenomenon. And he said, if that's what you want, that's what I'll feed you. You're all my champions. All of you are my champions. And everything was a positive affirmation and after positive reaffirmation without actually having to delve into the hard truths. Some will call them dirty truths, however you want to denominate them. I don't like to see them that way, but without having to delve into the hard truths, which we need to confront in order to be faithful to Christ and in order to grow. But unfortunately, we live in such an infantilized society that part of what feeds that infantilism is feed me a false hope, feed me a false image so that I don't have to hear the reality of what is happening. Hence the term blackpilling. Again, internet slang for despondency. The thing is that I don't see it that way. As I said before in my first point, I don't see it that way. I want to see things as they are. And this leads me to my second point. There are those whom would say, but Gio, isn't it true that if you constantly receive bad news, I've read somewhere in the Bible that it says that if you continually receive bad news, it's as akin to death to the bones. Yes, you'll read that in the portions of the Psalms and you'll read that in the portions of Proverbs. That is true. However, I would say that a lot of that has to do with how you take the news. Remember that Jesus is the first one to tell us that we will face affliction in the world. That's not happy news when you think about it. Jesus is the first one to tell us that we will face affliction in the world, that we will be hated for his name's sake. That's not happy news. As a matter of fact, I know plenty of Christians that they've told me, I don't like reading those passages because it brings me to such a dour mood. And I'm thinking that's absolutely foolish. Jesus is trying to forewarn you, to prepare you for what is coming. And yet, the same Jesus that is telling you about the dire situation out in the world, he says, but do not be concerned. I'm paraphrasing. I have victory over the world, and be overjoyed because I have defeated the world. So you'll notice that Jesus is telling us very clearly, Christ is telling us that as long as we have the proper attitude about these things, as long as we have a proper perspective of these things, then contrary to what Solomon said in the Ecclesiastes, there's a differentiating factor there. Yes, I can receive bad news, but ultimately I understand that my life is in Christ's hands, and that if I die tomorrow, if I die the day after, or whenever it is, I'm safe for all eternity. And that should bring satisfaction, fulfillment, and peace to the soul. Now, having said all of that, and bringing that to the forefront, and I hope that that'll be an exhortation for you during this live stream, I do need to go back to what J.D. Vance is saying here, because we can't forget the context of why he brings this forth. Evidently, he is acknowledging that there's an awful lot of people that are pretty disturbed, if not outright angry at this administration. Why? Because there's an awful lot of people, and this is, remember, my commentary here, I'm going to use an example of the political sphere to tie into the advice that I'm giving to the audience, that I'm dispensing to the audience on this live stream. He is acknowledging, in a sense, what others have attempted to tamp down, including the administration itself. I don't know how many of you peruse X, or maybe you're Facebook people, I don't know. But you'll note that the administration's social media group will do everything that it can to try to disprove the fact that there is mass discontent or mass discontentment with the administration from the amount of voters that gave this administration its vote. because it ran on certain core campaign promises only to be met with messages of reviling from the very person whom ran on those campaign promises. Might I remind you that the president himself said a few months ago that anyone that was holding his feet to the fire as to whether or not he was going to hold true to the campaign promises should not support him anymore, that he didn't want their support anymore. Recently, he called Americans that have seen through the foolishness of going to war with Iran as foolish themselves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And not only that, we're dealing with a president and his administration whom day by day they're constantly changing the narrative as to why they're engaging in certain activities, to the point where now no one in the administration can get its story straight. And then when you bring this forth, then they call you or me or others that notice it liars and blackpillers and so on and so forth. Why does this play a prominent role in my commentary today? Well, it goes back to what I said earlier. I've had people, and I'm sure a few of you have experienced the same thing, that when you try to bring a calm, collected, impartial view to what is happening in the world and to what surrounds them, they tend to get overly emotional and then they tend to attack the messenger. And one has to ask the question, why, if I'm trying to help this person to see with clarity what it is that they're confronting, just like Jesus tries to forewarn us of the afflictions that we will face in the world, the fact that we're going to be hated, et cetera, et cetera. We're trying to teach them, why are they trying to shut this down? Some of you might be thinking that, in a sense, what I'm going to say is that I am now going to justify what J.D. Vance says. Yes, he's talking about the political context, but I'm taking that as an example of what tends to happen in Christian circles. But let me use some corollaries here to prove the reactions and how many reactions can be unfounded, and furthermore, they actually deepen evil. Allow me to explain. Let's go back. I'm going to scrub back to the beginning of this, and we'll play this, and I'll pause intermittently to comment.
The piece of advice I'd give to you, and I give it to American students, American conservatives in particular, is resist the temptation to think that victory is immediate or that we're going to win back our civilization through instant gratification.
Now, he is saying this. Understand that he is saying this because obviously people gave this administration the vote so that they would implement policies that would begin to turn the tide immediately of the forces that were leading our country in a particular direction. But what they're seeing is that the administration has backpedaled from a lot of the initial policies that they had undertaken, which were part of core campaign promises. And now they're saying, boy, I'm completely disillusioned, is a word you hear frequently. I'm disappointed because it seems as if they're backpedaling on this. Mind you, there's various evidences of the fact. One example, one classic example that continues to be used by a few internet commentators, and I'm going to use it, is the issues of mass deportations. It got to a point where the administration's lackeys through social media a few weeks ago rather, when they noticed that the administration and Trump himself has said, I'm pulling back on this policy, they said, well, he never really promised this whole thing. He never really promised mass deportations. And I remember people in the comment section, they were actually pointing out photos from his campaign rallies where they were passing out placards that's literally read mass deportations now, just to give an example. So he's obviously acknowledging that there is mass discontent, even though the administration itself has tried to counteract this messaging by propagandizing the people into saying, no, there is no such thing as mass discontent. So here we're dealing essentially with a man that belongs to an administration that is trying to lie to people. It goes back to what I said earlier. I know some of you think I have a tendency to look at these things in the political realm and just comment exclusively on politics. No, this also has a play, as it were. It has a role to play within Christian circles. Why? Because people like him, being a politician and others, know that people want to receive, as it were, a particular vision, a particular viewpoint, even if that viewpoint would necessarily deny the truthfulness of how dire certain things can be. And therefore, they are into crafting narratives, just like he is spinning here.
It was founded in 1996. It's far more influential than it was back then.
Look, and I'm not saying that there is something to be said about rolling back and eliminating the evil that the forces of darkness and its minions have unleashed on society, and that in certain instances that takes time. But also one has to consider that having the levers of power, one would think that in this case, now we're talking in the political context again, that there would be a little more acceleration now that you have the levers of power to use certain levers to push back against those things. And in fact, what you see more is a retreat. And this is part of the popular discontent that exists with this sort of situation. So he's addressing that. He's in essence admitting, without admitting openly, that he knows that there is a popular discontent, even though him and the administration he belongs to have tried to lie about that mass discontent. But here's the thing. People are right to note that why is it that this group seems to advance their policies and the evil inherent within with such ease when they have power, and yet when we supposedly have power, it seems like we're impotent to do anything.
But I think a lot of people, this is particularly true in the United States of America, if they see something that the administration does they don't like, they say, oh, that's not what we voted for, we're going to check out of politics. No. That's the exact wrong response.
Well, let me ask you a question. Why did your administration do that in the first place? That instead of abiding by what you promised the voters, instead now you're putting the responsibility on the people whom are now discontented, dissatisfied, and disillusioned over the fact that you're not delivering on your promises. Now, again, I know I'm moving back and forth here between different circles, but this is something that also plays, and it's very important to profile this. I don't know how many times I've had the opportunity to talk to people whom were former disciples of people like Joel Osteen and other popular preachers whom leverage the gospel for various vain projects and their own self-aggrandizement and greed and what have you. And I hear them a lot. They say, I was disillusioned with this guy. And I always end up asking them, and they become angry with me when I said, but why were you disillusioned when the Bible clearly warns you against that type of person? Because here's the thing. Yes, they're merchants, but unless there's someone willing to buy the thing, there wouldn't be a market for it. But that's a problem. A lot of people don't want to assume responsibility for being fooled. I have much more respect for those who said, I didn't do my due diligence, I didn't study the thing, I left myself at a disadvantage and I allowed myself to be taken advantage of, and now I assume my responsibility. That's much different than never assuming responsibility for the fact that you made bad decisions, you trusted the wrong people, and now you're putting the blame on them exclusively instead of saying, hey, I've got a problem here. Same thing here. You'll notice that there's a lot of, as it were, crossing over in different circles here. Why isn't he acknowledging that he and the administration that he belongs to not only lied to the American people, but at the same time, instead of blaming the voters for blackpilling, why doesn't he acknowledge that they have failed on following through on what they promised? I know a lot of people in the so-called MAGA movement that they continue to run interference for this guy, for the president and others, and it reminds me again of what happens many times in Christian circles. Goes back to what I just said a couple of minutes ago. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't, or they'll even go out and give the benefit of the doubt to the false teachers themselves. No. They didn't really have bad intention. Why would you run interference? This is not an acknowledgement of the truth.
If we do something you don't like, the response should be to get more involved, to make your...
How about you just do what you promised instead of putting the onus, the burden on the people that voted for you? He's acting like your typical pontificating politician, figurehead, famous false preacher, where it's not on them, it's on you.
Heard, and to try to push things in the direction that you want them to be pushed. Our civilization was not built overnight. It's not.
Which, by the way, another side note here. One wonders if this is J.D. Vance now trying to separate himself from the popular discontent that exists around Trump to try to protect his own image for 2028. Can't put it past him.
Going to be saved overnight. And so what I'd encourage you to do is stay involved, be patient.
Well, if you follow through with your promises, then guess what? People will continue to reward you. But don't try to blame the people that are more than justified and angry over the fact that You said you were going to do this and now you're backpedaling. Don't put it on them.
Turn to checking out of the system entirely. There's way too much of that, I would say, in the Anglo system and the American system. There's way too much, I didn't like this thing that the vice president said, or I didn't like this thing that the president did, and I'm going to completely check out. We call that blackpilling in the United States of America, and blackpilling is how you give power to the forces that are trying to destroy what our ancestors built. We need to take power back from those people and build the kind of institutions that can actually save our societies. It will not happen overnight. It will not happen in the term of one prime minister or one president, but it will happen so long as we keep our faith in God and we work.
My general point here, folks, to use a corollary from the political world and how this happens within Christian circles, there's an awful lot of, if I could summarize, there's an awful lot of deceiving, double dealing, self-deception happening in these circles. And this is what leads to a lot of the so-called blackpilling inside of Christian circles. There are various ways to avoid this sort of despondency that could get you to a point where you're no longer growing, you're no longer doing what you must to achieve, to fulfill your responsibility to Christ and the things that he has given you to be a steward over. Here we have, and this is one of the reasons that I use him as an example, he was given a stewardship. The president were given a stewardship by the people that they promised something or some things. They back off of those promises, and now they're blaming the very people whom are holding them accountable to what they had promised, but now they are reneging on. Similarly, we find that a lot of Christians, instead of assuming the responsibility that Christ puts over them to do this, to do that, to do the other thing, they end up offloading that, the responsibility to be discerning, the responsibility to be responsible over what God has made them stewards, including their minds, their thoughts, their soul, etc., etc. They offload that because they want to hear good things. I don't want to hear bad things, which is in essence a cause, we said earlier, to be self-deceived and allow yourself to be deceived by these merchants of false hope. The Joel Osteens of life, we already talked about them before, etc., etc. And then it gets to the point where when those very same deceivers deceive you, instead of acknowledging the responsibility that you have over the fact that you were deceived because you allowed yourself to be deceived, you only say, no, it's their fault. I have no responsibility. Where's your growth? Then comes the despondency over, boy, the world is so bad. And you are stuck in a place where it's practically inertia. You're not moving. You're not growing. How do you fix that? Number one, allow yourself to see the world as it is, more particularly how the Bible tells you that the world is. Don't try to shrug that off as, I don't want to be sad. I don't want to be despondent. The reason that the Bible is giving you this information, the reason that Christ tells you the way the world is because he's trying to prepare you so that you would be apt to take it on. Don't shrug that off. Number two, don't shrug off personal responsibility. Understand that God has given you responsibilities. He's given you stewardship. Well, then it is your job as a faithful servant to undertake, to understand what those responsibilities are, meet them so that you will be told, good and faithful servant. And that includes, tied into the first point, knowing what you're capable of, understanding what you're capable of and what your fellow man is capable of, and making the necessary adjustments so that you don't allow that fallen nature were to overtake you, either from yourself out or from others toward you. In other words, don't allow naivete to cloud your judgment, including on people like this that I've just given you an example as. And then thirdly, understand that an attitude adjustment is necessary. Christ himself tells you things are bad out here, in essence. If I can paraphrase, things are bad out here. However, you don't see me in a saddened state. Jesus, when he tells us this, he says, I've got victory over the world. We're good. Sure, you're going to have to deal with afflictions, but best to deal with them with a joyful attitude, understanding that they're going to happen And as long as you have that attitude, then guess what? You're better primed, as it were, better primed to deal with that than allowing the black pill to overtake you. And now suddenly you're stagnant. And now you refuse to engage in the responsibilities that God has given you to be a steward over. Don't allow naivete, bad narratives, even false hope of blinding you to what you need to do, into the realities of the world that you need to acknowledge in order to move through it successfully. Be clear-eyed, be open-eyed, and last but not least, allow yourself to see the world as it is. If you do these things, I think, not that I think, I know, because this is what God promises, that you'll be on much, much better footing and you'll be able to navigate the world more successfully than your counterparts who prefer to see things as nothing but lollipops, bubbles, and everything nice and spicy. That's my advice for you on this live stream, on this edition of Irrespective. A couple of things before we sign off. Remember to subscribe, hit the notification bell, click on the thumbs up button, and share our content. Please do not forget to donate. It helps us to continue to pump out this content for your edification. There's a QR code that you can click on. You can see it there, or scan rather. In the upper left-hand corner of the screen, there's a link that you can click on or tap on if you're watching this through your phone, in the description box underneath the video player. Lastly, follow us on the socials. At Irrespective77 is our username on X. And on TikTok, you can find us under @TheIrrespective. That's all for now. We hope that you'll join us for the next live stream. Until then, adieu and Godspeed.